It's really you.
Uh, you know who I am? What's wrong?
I've been waiting my whole life for this moment. Huh. You look weirder than I imagined.
Oh,
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining me here today. It's the season of winter, and I've been locked inside due to a recent blizzard in my area. I've been looking for a game to kill the time with, a cozy game to play with fresh snow outside and a cup of hot tea to sip on while I enjoy it. And what better game to play than one about the harshness of winter itself? God of War Ragnarok. The most recent game in the beloved God of War series that wraps up the story of Kratos in ancient mythic Scandinavia. This is a series that I hold close, and it is not the first time I played through this game. I'd actually already 100% this game on my PS5 when it released, but I picked it up this winter Steam sale so I could dive headfirst once again into the gritty, violent, and dramatic world that follows our troubled anti-hero wherever he goes. Now, I enjoy this game a lot. It has a bit of everything, with the satisfying, slaughtering combat, exploration of beautifully crafted and well-detailed environments, puzzles and loot around every corner to keep you engaged, and the rich lore that is provided in healthy tidbits as you adventure through the 9 realms. I wouldn't say this is a perfect game by any means, but I feel it hits more marks than it misses. But as I got sucked into the continuation of the story of Father Kratos and his now older teen son Atreus, I reached a point in the game that I had forgotten about. A certain portion of Ragnarok that might be worse than Fimbulwinter itself. A point in the game that sticks out like a sore thumb for being one of the worst paced, cringe-inducing, eye-rolling, and yawn-generating mission of the whole game. Yes, I'm talking about that one level in Ragnarok. Atreus' character development journey in Ironwood.
Come on, let's take a walk. You can help me with something, and I'll teach you. You know, giant stuff.
Now, before we delve into the meat of the problem here, I'd like to go over a bit of context to this part of the story so we can understand what the direction of this mission was and why it failed to hit the mark it was aiming for. I'll be as brief as I can here because I don't want to spoil the whole experience of the game up to this point, but I will be getting into spoilers, so I still recommend playing this game in its entirety, and definitely play the 2018 God of War so you can get the whole picture, as it is a very good story overall. So what is happening in the plot that leads Atreus to his undeserving fate? Kratos and Atreus have recently sought out the Norse god of war Tyr in Svartalfheim, the realm of the dwarves, and have freed him from his prison in the Jarnsmita pit mines that Odin placed him in. Tyr has become a pacifist and has sworn off fighting, but agrees to help him discover more about the prophecy of Ragnarok. So Kratos, Atreus, Mimir, and Tyr travel to Alfheim, the realm of the elves, to find one of Groa's shrines that might shed more light on their situation. Groa is a giantess that is a seer in Norse mythology, one with prophetic powers that can predict the future, or at least specific events of the future. Not necessarily how they will happen, but what will happen. So they find Groa's shrine in the temple that holds the light of Alfheim. In Groa's shrine, they discover that Ragnarok is in fact not coming to destroy all the 9 realms, but instead it will only destroy Asgard after a certain champion unites all of the other realms to fight against it. This shocks Tyr, as this means Groa lied to Odin about what the Ragnarok prophecy actually is. Little do we know at this point, but Tyr is actually Odin in disguise, so this upsets him, and rightfully so. After this revelation, they return home to the realm between realms and discuss what they learned. Tyr/Odin refers to Atreus as the champion in the prophecy, which upsets Kratos, as he doesn't want Atreus to be involved in this war at all, let alone be the champion that leads it. Kratos then lashes out at Atreus, saying that he is not Loki and that he is Kratos' son and nothing more. Atreus then very upsettingly gets up and goes to his room. Sindri meets him in there, tries to calm him down, and tells him to go to sleep as that's where all problems work themselves out. Atreus goes to sleep, and this is where our nightmare begins.
But we're gods. We can do whatever we want.
please, please wait, please.
Now, up to this point, Atreus has been bombarded with all kinds of prophecies and questions about who he is and what his future holds, which has made him very anxious to learn more and figure out what his destiny truly is. Why is this giant named Loki, and what does that mean? Is he the champion to unite all the realms against Asgard? Can they defy prophecy and stop Ragnarok? Well, most of his questions will soon be partially answered in this next segment. Atreus dreams about his past self in the previous game and then wakes up in a mysterious place and is greeted by some wolves. They lead him to a clearing where he finds a painting of him holding a knife to a girl standing over him. And about 2 seconds later, that exact scene happens, which then introduces us to Angrboda, our guide for the next 2 hours of slop that will have you begging to return back to Kratos by the time it's over. Now, I'll speed through most of what happens in this section, as a lot of it is just awkward, romantic teen relationship building. But Angrboda calls Atreus Loki, tells him she's been waiting for him, and then begins to lead him back to her camp. She explains to him that he is in Ironwood, or the Forest of the Giants as it's actually known as, but it's called Ironwood so Odin won't search for it. They run into some enemy encounters, have some back and forth, then do a pointless, unwinnable race that brings them back to camp. Now at this point it has been about 20 minutes of nonsense, so I'm itching to learn more about what is actually going on here. So Angrboda leads Atreus over to some painted rocks that are covered in tarps and begins to reveal his prophecy. His father Kratos will die, and he will serve under Odin. Atreus loses it over this information, goes total wolf mode, and freaks out over the shrine. Angrboda calms him down out of his wolf form and covers the painting, telling him not to think about it right now, and to come help her and learn some giant stuff.
Giant stuff. Giant stuff. Giant stuff.
Now this is about as much exposition as you're going to get for the next 30 minutes of gameplay. During this time, you help Angrboda collect some seeds and roots, fight some enemies, skip some rocks, all while traveling on Yala, one of the slowest creatures they could have chosen for this segment. They even acknowledge it with this line by Atreus.
Do you have any animals that could maybe, go faster? No offense, Yala.
Of course I do. They just can't carry both of us. This is much easier.
Got it.
It's almost as if the devs are laughing at the player, knowing how slow this part is. I'd say the only piece of information during this time that is actually useful is when they're traveling and Angrboda mentions that there's a soul in Atreus' knife.
So, what's that soul in your knife?
The what?
This does become relevant later in the game, but for such a one-off comment, they definitely could have moved it elsewhere so it has a bigger moment. After a lot of digging around and doing chores for Angrboda, we finally get our next piece of information, one that fulfills Angrboda's destiny and sets Atreus on his. She brings Atreus to the top of a cliff where she pulls out a bag of marbles. Atreus comments how he has seen these marbles before and pulls out one that he has collected from one of the shrines Angrboda's mom painted. He asks what they are and she tells him to take a look. Atreus begins to pull out these different marbles and reads the names that are inscribed on them before aggressively putting them back in the bag. Angrboda scolds him and tells him to be careful, because these are actually the souls of all the giants that hid themselves in these marbles so Odin wouldn't find and slaughter them. Now I'm going to pause the story for a second because I want to make a comment on why this scene pisses me off. Because right after Angrboda scolds Atreus for being rough with the marbles because they are filled with the giant souls, she then goes and plays with the soul of one of the marbles. Just being completely hypocritical and probably even worse than Atreus, since she's actually messing with the soul of the giant instead of the vessel it's being held in. Unbelievable writing if you ask me, and makes me wonder what the hell was going on with the writers and the dev team during this whole portion of the game. Anyway, she hands the bag to Atreus and tells him it's now his responsibility to care for the giants and that he'll know what to do with them when the time is right. Atreus gets upset because this is a lot of responsibility for him, and Angrboda gets upset because her destiny is now fulfilled after handing them over, and has now lost all relevancy to the plot, figuratively and literally. Now at this time, every relevant plot point has been covered in this section, but we still have just about an hour left of this. Once again, I'll try to make this quick as the rest of this part is just filler. Atreus and Angrboda travel back down the cliffs, get attacked by some werewolf type bee, make it to the bottom, and instead of traveling back to the camp to end the suffering, we now take a shortcut past a sinkhole where Angrboda used to get her art supplies from before it was infested with creatures. Atreus suggests clearing out the sinkhole, and then we're sidetracked again, doing more cleanup for Angrboda. After a 20-minute segment down here, we finally clear it out, climb back to the top, and are ready to head back. But before that, we get a romantic one-on-one where they sit and look at some fireflies. Now we're finally ready to return, and we get our last joy ride with Yala. We get a cutscene of Angrboda feeding Yala and Atreus practicing his Riz when a nearby wolf cries out in pain. They hide behind a tree, and a mysterious voice talks to the wolf before dragging it away. Of course, we now have to put off our escape and follow the wolf into the woods where we fight more enemies, and Angrboda reveals that the voice was actually her grandmother who likes to take the souls of animals for fun, and that we now have to go stop her because she has been avoiding it for too long. Cue another lengthy portion of fighting enemies and traveling until we make it to Grandma's house. While looking for Grandma's magic cauldron, they find a soulless snake where Atreus randomly grabs a giant marble and puts the soul into it. It slithers away, and Atreus gets upset again over the responsibility, hands the bag back over to Angrboda, and tells her to just call him Atreus. Now they decide to just leave after all of that and try to escape the way they came in until they run into Grandma. Now we actually get a decent boss fight here against Grandma, but I'm afraid it comes too late in this slog to bring any kind of interest other than wanting it to be over with. We defeat Grandma, destroy her cauldron, and then we get to leave while Grandma shouts mean things towards Angrboda. On the way back to camp, Atreus attempts to cheer Angrboda up by challenging her to a race in which he loses again. Now we finally reach the promised land, and there's nothing left to do but watch one more cutscene before we leave for good. Atreus looks over his prophecy painting again, vowing that he'll do what he can to prevent his dad's death. He sits down with Angrboda, and she hands him a giant marble that was supposed to be his mother's, but is unfortunately not filled with any soul. Like Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, Atreus holds it and chants home until he gets teleported back to his house in Midgard. He fights a few enemies, then attempts to take the door portal back to the realm between realms, before running straight into Kratos, who angrily questions him where he's been the last couple days. Their conversation is cut short when more enemies appear, and then we finally regain control of Kratos.
Atreus! You do not want this! Call your mind! Control it!
Now I actually had to take a break halfway through this part of my playthrough, as I'd gotten so tired of this portion that I couldn't tank it all in one go. In total, this took me just under 2 hours to complete the whole section. So what went wrong? And was there anything that this segment did right? Let's start with the things it got right, as I think it'll be easier to get this out of the way first. I think this was a necessary plotline for Atreus' character development, and I'm not opposed to Atreus dreaming his way into Ironwood. This world is full of magic, and sleeping is no escape from it, especially when you combine it with an emotional Atreus that has magical outbursts when pushed too far. Atreus and the audience needed some answers, and Ironwood was the place for us to get them. Now I think the prophecy and responsibility of the giant souls is fine. It's heavily implied that prophecies are open to interpretation in this game, and that just because it looks a certain way doesn't mean that it is the way it will turn out. So Kratos dying and Atreus serving Odin is what the prophecy appears to be, but in reality it's an abstract representation of what will actually happen. Kratos did technically die at the beginning of the game when he fought Thor, but then was brought back to life by him right after. Atreus does end up serving Odin later in the game, but ultimately defies his wishes and doesn't let him have the Mask of Creation. So the prophecy does come to fruition, but not in the way that is initially expected. Atreus is also one of the last giants, so it makes sense that it's his responsibility to determine the fate of the remaining souls. We already know that Angrboda's destiny is to give them to Atreus, so she's out of the picture here. It's up to him to create the future for his people, and understandably, that's a very intimidating mission. So I'd say this part of the story is fine, and serves as a way to throw off the audience because now you're unsure as to what the future holds for these characters, and it creates a long-term goal for Atreus that goes beyond stopping/surviving Ragnarok. That's really all the good things I had to say about this part of the game, mostly just the plot points, not the actual gameplay. So now we're going to go into what went wrong. Well, a lot went wrong here. Firstly, this section was way too bloated. I've heard that maybe the devs were trying to slow down the pacing of the game here, as things have been moving fairly quickly up to this point, but getting sidetracked from the main course for 2 hours with just a couple moments that are actually relevant to the meat of the story just feels out of touch. The seed/root picking and rock skipping sections were meant to be character/relationship building for Atreus and Angrboda, but they dragged on way too long and felt so bland and cringy. And being forced to ride a very slow Yala during the majority of this part, and being patronized for it, just feels cruel. The combat definitely felt forced here too. Like they recognized how slow things were, so they threw in a few enemies here and there to keep the action up and not bore the player too much, but it honestly just aggravated me because it stopped the flow of the story, which I wanted to get over with as soon as possible. Now, I'd like to go over Angrboda's character here. See, Angrboda isn't a bad character, or at least the idea of what Angrboda is to Atreus isn't bad, but the execution just didn't land very well for me. Angrboda is a teen girl about Atreus' age. She's a giant like him and has been alone taking care of Ironwood for a while. It's understandable that she'd be a bit socially awkward here given that, but my issue with her is that she seems a bit dense and clearly can be hypocritical to what she preaches. For someone that is prophetic and understands the way fate works in that regard, she sure is unquestioning as to what her paintings mean. For Atreus' prophecy, Atreus reads it as Kratos dies and he becomes a servant of Odin. And Angrboda just agrees with Atreus and is like, yeah, that's how it is and nothing can be interpreted differently, so just accept that it is what it is. This just doesn't make sense to me, as prior to this, it has been established that prophecies aren't always what they seem to be.
I think of it this way. When it comes to subverting prophecy, knowledge is power. Without the full picture and context, the finer details can lead you to tragically incorrect interpretations.
So why is Angrboda so dead sure that this is what will happen? She should already know this and be able to console Atreus by telling him that these things could come to pass in a way that is unexpectedly better than it appears. Also, like I mentioned before, that scene with Angrboda playing with the giant soul is just so wrong given the context of the situation just a few seconds prior. I'm not sure if these are flaws that they purposely added to show the player that she's not perfect, but why do we still get the impression that she's just better and more mature than Atreus? And like I said, after this portion of the game, her relevancy falls off immediately, so we don't get to see or explore much of her character after this. Next, the sinkhole and grandma portion of this level just felt tagged on for no reason. The sinkhole especially, just straight filler and more meaningless chores to do in Ironwood. At least with grandma, we got to see a bit more of Angrboda's character and her family struggles, but it was still way too late in this section for me to care. If Ironwood was half as long as it was, then I could see the grandma boss fight being a cool way to end your time here, but this is all at the end of a 2-hour slog that just makes you beg for it to end. And just my own personal gripe with this part, why the hell are we doing races if we can't even win? It's actually scripted for you to lose both times, so like what's even the point? To give Angrboda meaningless points over Atreus? I'm just not sure why this is even in the game, and it would be better to just not have it at all, unless you could actually win.
What happens to you now?
I don't know. Like I said, once you're gone, my part in this is over.
No shit!
Alright, I'm not here to say I'm a master of script writing for a AAA video game, or that I could rewrite this whole level and it would be a million times better, but I have a few suggestions that I believe would at least improve the player experience during this part, while also keeping the story they want to tell intact. Firstly, the chore sections need to go, or be placed more seamlessly into the story. For example, it might have been better to move the seed/root picking part right when Atreus gets there. Like Atreus arrives from Dreamland and runs into a surprised Angrboda who's just out picking up her daily supplies. She immediately agrees to bring Atreus to camp to show him his prophecy, but she needs to finish gathering her resources that he interrupted before heading back. Here we can get some back and forth between the two characters, getting some context of Angrboda and who she is, where they're at, and what this place is, and maybe a bit of relationship development between them. We need to get rid of the race bit entirely, and they just show up to the camp to read Atreus' prophecy. After the prophecy reading, Atreus runs away in wolf form to cool off, maybe have a quick enemy encounter here, and then Angrboda shows up and calms him down. He calms down, Atreus agrees to go back to camp to discuss the prophecy more, but then they hear Grandma take the wolf and they track her down to do the Grandma fight. After the fight, Angrboda is more serious and tells Atreus it's time to reveal his destiny with the giant souls. He gets the bag, anxiously accepts his destiny, doubts his prophecy, and then returns home with more questions than answers. All in all, this part should take no more than an hour to complete. Now our final question of the video is, does this put a sour on the rest of the game? Well, this is a subjective question, and for some people it most definitely does. But these people probably don't like the Atreus sections in general, so having the lowest point in the game being Atreus part just compounds their distaste. Me personally, I don't mind the Atreus levels so much as long as they're short and to the point, which the rest of them are. Ironwood definitely left a bad taste in my mouth, but I found myself quickly getting engrossed into the story and gameplay again once Kratos was back in my hands. And the other Atreus sections go much smoother and provide a lot of good story and character development for a much broader cast. At the end of the day, I still really enjoy this game, and I will continue to recommend it for those who have never experienced the modern God of War story. There's so much more to the game than this one part that makes up for it. There's still some rough parts later on, like the lackluster final fight with Odin, which could be its own video, but overall this game is solid. It plays good, it feels good, it looks good, and wraps up in a mostly satisfying way that leaves room for future games in the series. The story of Kratos has come a long way, and to say that this was the lowest part in the entire catalog is probably a compliment to the legacy of the Ghosts of Sparta. Let me know what you think. Is this the lowest point in the series, or is there something else that tops it? Did Ironwood ruin the game for you? Were there other aspects of the game that brought it down, or were you satisfied with how it went? Either way you see it, thank you for watching and making it this far. I hope you enjoyed this content, and have a great day.